When I started my first job at a law firm in my 20s, I was quietly terrified. Classic imposter syndrome. Was I smart enough? Would I fit in? Did I even really belong? But not once did I worry that being a woman would hold me back. My grandmother wasn't as fortunate. Women of her generation were banned from the legal profession in the UK. When my mother started her first job in London, women had only just won the right to equal pay. And my aunt, at the start of her career, couldn't even open a bank account without a man to co-sign. 3 generations, 1 family, and so much has changed. Today, I can vote, run a business, own my home, and hopefully figure out a way to work by a tropical beach all year round. I'm immensely grateful to the incredible activists who've made this possible. It's remarkable how far we've come in a century, which makes it even more galling that we are still more than a century away from true gender parity, where all genders share full equal power and opportunity. According to the World Economic Forum, no country in the world has achieved this. I've seen firsthand in my work the barriers that women still face in the workplace, not to mention the awful injustices that women endure in many places around the world. For context, we are closer to getting humans on Mars than we are reaching gender equality on Earth. It's crazy. And what's worse, progress is fragile and can slide into reverse. Did you know, in the 1980s, women in Afghanistan held twice the number of seats in parliament as women in parliament in each of the UK, France, and Italy? Today, Afghan women can't even speak in public. 1 in 4 countries saw backlash against women's rights last year, and we saw rights being rolled back in places many thought untouchable. The unnerving paradox is half the world believes we've already gone far enough on women's rights. 45% say we've pushed so far for women's equality we're now discriminating against men. And 1 in 6 believe that equality policies are harming society. What's even more surprising? These views aren't being driven by older generations clinging to tradition. They're mostly coming from Gen Z and millennials, including women, the very groups we would assume would be the biggest champions of equality. Gender equality has been the gold standard, the rallying cry under which we've been operating to advance rights for women. But if this is where we are today, it begs the question, is gender equality still fit for purpose? Listen, pursuing gender equality has delivered undeniable benefits. I'm living proof of that. But it also has fundamental flaws. First, it requires women to succeed within systems that were never designed for them. Systems built for dominance, not fairness. And this keeps us locked in a zero-sum game, where for one group to rise, another must fall. Second, gender equality has rightly focused on women and girls, but many men are struggling too, trapped by rigid gender roles, facing mental health crises, and appallingly high suicide rates. It doesn't matter that technically equality benefits men too. Many feel typecast either as villains or saviors without their needs attended to, and naturally, resentment grows. Third, gender diverse people, they're left out almost entirely, or treated as a threat to defend against. Yet, like all of us, most simply want the basic human right to live in dignity and safety. These fault lines are being widened by a growing social issue we cannot afford to ignore. If men have historically benefited from the system, That's not necessarily the case for today's young men and boys. Research from the Centre for Social Justice in the UK confirms that young men are increasingly falling behind in higher education and early career opportunities. They're becoming more isolated, addicted to porn, radicalized online by misogynistic influences. This is a ticking time bomb. And if we don't address it, I fear the gender gaps will widen, the backlash will intensify, or even worse, calcify into hatred. What if gender equality as we practice it today is inadvertently perpetuating the very problem it seeks to solve, reinforcing an us versus them mindset and deepening divisions? Now more than ever, I believe we need solutions that bring us together, not drive us further apart. And one look at social media will show you that what we're doing now isn't exactly working. Part of my research into this issue shows that nearly 70% believe it's time for a different approach to gender progress. 3 times as many as those who want to stick with gender equality. We can honor everything that gender equality has achieved and still have the courage and humility to admit it's time to evolve. So what is that evolution? Well, I don't think it's a new policy or a rebrand. I don't think this issue is going to be solved by semantics or a flashy new logo. Instead, we need to step into a completely new paradigm, one that enables us to take care of everyone. And I call this gender harmony. Gender harmony is a practical philosophy that seeks to create a world where everyone, regardless of their gender, feels safe, valued, and able to thrive. Where we celebrate our differences, but anchor ourselves in our common humanity. This isn't about tinkering around the edges, trying to fix inequality. It's about fundamentally rethinking how we approach gender progress altogether by adopting a universal model that supports each gender group with their distinct needs. The path to this is laid down by the Gender Harmony Charter, which contains a set of principles which guide how we think and lead in every area of society when it comes to gender. Principles that invite us to, for example, see gender advancement as a collective effort, grounded in respect and shared responsibility, to refuse to trade one group's progress for another's loss, to commit to having compassionate, collaborative conversations, especially in times of apparent conflict, and through it all, to harness radical optimism, the belief that this kind of future is absolutely possible, even though at times it may feel hard. Gender harmony doesn't prescribe one-size-fits-all solutions, because that could never work across every context. Instead, it provides specialists and leaders with a common framework within which to create their own initiatives, but in a way that can also contribute to greater collective progress. By aligning thousands of fragmented efforts, gender harmony could facilitate growth at scale for all people, including women and girls. I'm not alone in this view. When I shared a very brief introduction to this in my research, nearly 2/3 said they would prefer gender harmony, with less than 4% wanting to stick with gender equality. Some of you might be skeptical. Is a truly harmonious outcome ever possible, especially in today's climate? Well, history shows us that even the widest rifts can be bridged when we're willing to adopt a new way of engaging. Between 1988 and 1998, Bougainville in Papua New Guinea was ravaged by one of the bloodiest civil wars per capita since World War II. 1 in 10 people were killed. Peace seemed impossible. Yet the war did end. And what made the difference? Not the typical negotiations. Instead, it was local communities, village leaders, ex-fighters, women's groups who came together, and using traditional reconciliation practices, they rebuilt trust and laid the foundation for a peace agreement that defied the odds. Proof that when we lead with our shared humanity and everyone's given a voice, even the fiercest conflict can give way to progress. You may be wondering, well, what would gender harmony look like in action? How does it differ from our current gender equality approach? And how can it ensure that I don't lose out? Well, let's look at some realistic everyday scenarios. Right now, in many countries like the UK, if a working father decides to break protocol and ask for 3 months paid paternity leave instead of the standard 2 weeks, his manager is likely to refuse and suggest unpaid leave if he wants to take more, even though women on average get 6 to 12 months of paid leave. With gender harmony, the company would put in place a neutral policy so that every caregiver is entitled to equal leave, and all requests are embraced without stigma. Under gender equality, a government task force looking at getting girls into STEM is likely to suggest more scholarships for girls, more grants, more PR. Gender harmony zooms out and asks, why are any careers still heavily gendered? And implements initiatives to break down stereotypes and encourage all young people to follow their strengths, whether that's girls in tech or boys in care roles. Gender equality, of course, wants to keep women safe in the streets, with better street lighting, more CCTV, self-defense classes. Gender harmony wonders, what actually makes a place feel safe for all? And the answer? Connection. Putting on community events, night markets, places where local people can get to know one another and look out for each other. These examples are mere glimpses. They point to a bigger possibility, a world where fairness is designed in from the start, where no one is left behind, and progress truly lifts us all. We've made huge strides when it comes to gender rights, but we still have a long way to go. And right now, we are at an important crossroads. We can double down on the same strategies and risk stagnation or worse, regression, or we can choose a different path, the path of gender harmony. It may well be complex and challenging to shift into this paradigm. I'm not naive. When I think of the possibilities for all genders to coexist, collaborate, and flourish, I think that's worth striving for. Imagine it, in our lifetime, not a century from now, we could live in a world where harmony is the norm, where governments appoint gender harmony ministers and build policies to advance all genders. I'd like to see the UN redefine its focus from gender equality to gender harmony, and for every child to grow up and see their future as limitless, not defined by their gender. But it starts smaller than that. It starts with you, with the choices that you make at home, at work, in your community. So when you find yourself in a moment that matters, I invite you to ask yourself, what would gender harmony look like here? Because when each of us chooses it, we don't just change the conversation, we change the future. Thank you.